The first time I tried to make biscotti, I thought I had ruined the entire batch of cookies. And I thought they were much more difficult to make than they actually are. So after perfecting my technique a little bit, and it's by no means perfect, I do have a great, easy way to make biscotti, and I'm gonna show you exactly how to do that. Welcome to the Salt and Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food, and we keep it real simple. Today we're gonna make biscotti. Now biscotti is basically a twice baked cookie, so it's on the drier side. And usually it's sliced lengthways, so it's a long or oblong cookie that is served most often with tea or coffee in the morning. I happen to think they're delicious anytime though. I love biscotti. But I was really intimidated to make it because it didn't make sense to me. You form logs, you bake them in the oven, and then you cut them and you end up with these beautiful biscotti cookies. I could not wrap my head around it. Turns out it's very easy to do. And the version that I'm making today is a pumpkin spice biscotti, but you can make all kinds of flavors using the same easy technique. All right, I'm using a KitchenAid mixer, but you don't have to. You can use a stand mixer. I do recommend having some sort of a mixer though. It's gonna make life a whole lot easier for you. And to the bowl of the mixer, we have the paddle attachment attached. We're gonna put in 6 tablespoons of butter, 1 1/4 cups of white sugar, 3 large eggs, all at once, that's what I like. 1 to 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 1/2 cup of canned pumpkin, or if you make your own, you can use that. Now this is not the pumpkin pie, the canned pumpkin pie that you can get, it's just plain pumpkin. That is important because the canned pumpkin has other ingredients in it. And that is it for right now. We will lower the mixer here, lock it into place, and put it on a medium speed to mix everything up. Now this is kind of interesting because usually we add all of our dry ingredients together and then mix them in with the wet. But because I don't always use all of the flour when I make this, which is 4 1/2 cups, I like to put my spices right in the wet mixture and let them mix up. What I have here is 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, ground cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoon of cloves, 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and 1/2 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt, or you could use kosher salt. If you're gonna use table salt, only use about 1/4 teaspoon. Mix those up, and then we're gonna add it in here to the wet mixture. I'm also gonna break the rules because I put the baking powder in right now. Usually you mix that with your flour too, but the little bit of time difference isn't gonna make any difference at all. So this is 2 teaspoons of baking powder going straight in. Make sure you get it all in there. And now we start adding in the flour. And don't worry that it looks a little bit lumpy. It's all gonna come together just fine. A little non-traditional way of making it, but it's easy and it works. So what I'm doing is adding in about 1/2 cup of flour at a time, just waiting for the mixer to mix it together. What we're looking for is a firm but soft dough that is not tacky or sticks to your fingers, okay? So that's why I like to go by like looking at the batter more so than measurements. Now don't put it on high speed or you'll have flour all over your kitchen. You hear that change in the pitch? That means my dough's getting thicker and thicker. And this little KitchenAid is not a real heavy duty one, so it's feeling it a little bit. But that's how I know I'm getting close. Now, if your mixer is really under strain, you can certainly turn it off and do the rest by hand. So I have about 1/2 cup of flour left, so 4 cups are in. I have 1/2 left, and now I'm gonna go ahead and turn the mixer off. pull this up, and the rest I go by feel, okay? And I really think that that's the best way to do it because you don't want to add too much flour, but you need just the right amount. And the best guide is your hands and the feel of the dough. All right, so what I do right now is just kind of feel it, pull it up, but see how it's sticking to my fingers? We don't want that. So we do need to add in a little bit more flour, but now don't go overboard with this right away. Add it in increments because we never know when it's gonna be exactly perfect. So probably about 1/8 of a cup. Stir that together. Make sure you get way underneath. Let's see, that's looking pretty good. Really. So let's go ahead and see if I can knead this with my hands a little bit. No, I'm still a little sticky. Still a little sticky. So let's go ahead so you can get a better view. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of flour on my cutting board and we're gonna do the rest there so you can see exactly what I mean by the right texture. All right, let's put some there. And get all of this out. All right, so I'm gonna add a little bit of flour to the top here, just a sprinkle, okay? Over the top, maybe a tablespoon. We can be done with that for now. And then I'm gonna pat it and sort of knead it just a little bit. But what I'm doing is just incorporating this flour that I just added into the dough and making sure that it is not too tacky for me to form into logs. And that looks like that is perfect. So I probably used, I would say 4 1/4 cups for this batch. And it does vary. So go by the look of the dough and the feel of the dough. Now see, I can touch it, nothing's coming off on my fingers. And it's really nice to work with. So just get all that extra flour incorporated into it. Look, I'm acting like it's bread. It's not bread. You don't have to do that. And we don't have to knead it to develop gluten or anything like that. We just want to incorporate the flour. All right, then what I like to do is just cut it right in half. I am not particular about this. You do not need to be particular either. Set one to the side. Now see where it's sticking a little bit? Keep that extra little bit of flour there. Put that on there. Just gonna make it easier for you to form your loaves. Now, let me put this over here so you can see. Now, what you wanna do is form, and if you're sticking, like I am right there, add a little bit of flour to the edge. It's not gonna matter. Now, I am sure there are people that are professional biscotti makers that are screaming at me right now and saying, this is not how you make biscotti. But guess what? It's easy and it turns out delicious. All right, so make your log about 12 inches long and then flatten it out just a little bit. So just like that. And now what we're gonna do is transfer this to a baking sheet that has a piece of parchment on it. I actually usually form my logs right on the parchment paper, and that's so that they don't stick, but this one looks like it's pretty good. It's not sticking. We're good to go. All right, there we go. It's about 12 inches long. I'm gonna repeat the same thing with the next log. So put a little bit down here on your cutting board or whatever surface you're using. And I also have my oven preheated, and it is preheated to 350 degrees. So we're gonna put that on there just like that. That looks good. All right, so we put our biscotti in preheated 350 degree oven for 30 minutes. As it cooks, you're gonna see it start to crack and you're gonna say, oh my gosh, don't worry about it. Turns out perfect. Just leave it in there for 30 minutes and then we'll pull it out. I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so after 30 minutes, has always been done for me. It will feel a little bit soft, but you're also gonna see all these cracks and stuff. Don't worry about them, okay? They are going to be just fine when we go to cut it, but you have to wait for it to cool to cut. So what I like to do is transfer them over to my cooling rack, but after about 5 minutes. They sit on this tray for about 5 more minutes. That just kind of helps them start to cool down, and then I will transfer them over. You could just pull your parchment paper over, or you can use, a spatula, or you can just pick them up with your hands if they're cool enough. The idea is to get them off the hot pan though, so that they don't continue to cook, okay? The parchment's not gonna make any difference, so let's just see. I don't know if they're done enough. Let's just hope I don't make a mistake. Oh, there we go. So look, I didn't even let them sit for 5 minutes and they did just fine. Now we're gonna let them cool completely. You can do this overnight, or what I found is it takes about 2 to 3 hours. So either way is perfectly fine. Once they're cool, we will cut them. Then we get them back on the tray for their second bake, and then we take them out and we decorate them. So once the logs are completely cool, or at least cool enough, you know, that you can touch them comfortably, now we are going to slice them and get them back into the 350-degree oven. Now, to slice them, you can do this straight, just like this, and have little short biscotti, or you could do them at an angle so that you have longer biscotti. I always do mine at an angle. The width is really a matter of preference. Normal is between 1/2 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch. But let me tell you, when I made mine 1/2 of an inch, my friend who's Italian said, "What is that? You made them too thin. You need to cut them thicker." And I was like, "Really? I mean, how thick?" And she's like, "Well, no more than 3/4 of an inch." And I was like, "Well, okay." So we're gonna go 3/4 of an inch to appease my friend Amber. Or thereabouts, because I am not measuring. She would sit here and mark 3/4 of an inch and she would be exact. Me, we're not doing that. We're eyeballing it. So, I think they're too big though. But let's see. And then I'm just gonna cut them right on like a bias here. Now, of course, if you cut them in 1/2 of an inch like I like, you're gonna get more. So keep that in mind too. The one thing that I probably could have done with this is actually pushed, oh, they look pretty good for biscotti. They look really good. But I could have pressed the log down. I didn't have as much spreading with this batch as I did with previous batches, but it's still gonna work out. When you're making things like this, just don't sweat it, okay? Even if it all starts to crumble up on you because something happened, too much flour, whatever, crumble it up, bake them again, and put them as a topping on some kind of a cake or something, because these are really delicious. They're not overly sweet, which is what I like, although we are gonna add some icing to them, which is a spiced icing, which is just beautiful. And it hardens, so you can still give them as gifts. Now see, these are just way too big for me, but Amber says to do it this way, so I'm gonna do it this way. All right, so let's see. How much should I get out of there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So about a dozen per log. So this will make 2 dozen biscotti cookies. And now what we do is lay them back flat on parchment-lined tray to go in and bake for the second time. Now, as I line these up, you're going to see some are cut thicker, some are cut thinner. So maybe Amber's onto something by measuring. But boy, oh boy, that takes too much time for me. All right, these look great. Once I get them on, I'm gonna put them in the oven for another 7 to 10 minutes. These are cut a little bit thicker, so they may take 10 minutes, but 1/2 of an inch usually takes about 7 minutes. And then I have a second log I'm gonna do, but I'm not gonna do that today. I'll do that off camera. I can wrap that biscotti and put it in the freezer and then take it out, cut it up, double bake it, and have another batch. All right, so these are gonna go into the oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 to 10 minutes. All right, so they were in for 10 minutes on 350, but as I feel them, I think they can go a little bit longer. So I'm gonna pop them in for another 5 minutes because I really want, you want them to be like they're kind of toasted, okay? So these just feel a little bit soft to me still. So definitely, yeah, I'm gonna go another 5 minutes. And that's really because of the thickness of them. Because when I do them thin, at 1/2 of an inch, I only have to do them for 7 minutes. So all right, we're gonna go back in for another 5 minutes. I can tell just by looking at these that they are perfect. But guess what? I had to go an additional 5 minutes. So the second bake for this thickness ended up being 20 minutes instead of the 7 to 10 when I cut them a little bit thinner. So anyway, live and learn, but they are perfect. They're gonna have the perfect texture when they cool. So you want them slightly brown on top, not like browning too much, but slightly brown. And you wanna, like, they feel like the top of a toast, okay? Perfectly toasted toast. And that is exactly what you want. Now I'm gonna get them off onto my cooling rack again so that they can cool, and we're gonna make a delicious icing to dip them in. All right, now it's important to let them cool, whether or not you're going to dip them in chocolate or what like we're gonna do, which is a icing that actually will get hard, okay? But if you try to serve them right now, I mean, they're good, but they're not gonna be the right texture. They're still gonna be a little bit soft. But they're good. They're not too soft, they're good. But let them cool, they're even gonna get better. So to decorate your biscotti, you can do it all kinds of different ways. And you don't even have to do it at all if you don't want to. But what I've tried is a couple different things, and I decided I like the icing sugar the best. But these are just dipped in white chocolate, and then candied pecans are sprinkled on top. But honestly, I wasn't a big fan of the flavor combination. I just didn't think it went with the pumpkin biscotti that well. So I thought, well, what does go with pumpkin biscotti? And that would be a spiced icing. So like, kind of like a pumpkin spiced icing, but there's no pumpkin flavor in here. It's just the spices. And I made it, and it's delicious, and it works perfectly because it will harden on your biscotti when you let them sit out overnight. So let's get started making that because it's super easy. Now, it is not diet friendly. It is not diabetic friendly. There's a ton of sugar in this. It needs to be that way. That's how it hardens, okay? So we start off with 4 cups of sifted powdered sugar into the bowl of an electric stand mixer like I have here, or you could use a hand mixer and a large bowl. Either way is fine. All right, next in are gonna be the spices. And what you wanna use is 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, half of a teaspoon of allspice, half of a teaspoon of nutmeg, half of a teaspoon of cloves. Put all those in. And 4 tablespoons of butter. And that I add in because I honestly do not like the flavor of a confectioner's sugar like icing, okay? Like the icing that, you know, sugar cookie icing, you know what I'm talking about. Cut out cookie icing. I hate the flavor of it. But I found if I added a little bit of butter, it kind of gave a little richness. So I like that. You don't have to add that if you don't want to. 2 tablespoons of corn syrup. I know people aren't going to like that, but I believe it is necessary. I've never tried it without it, but I really do think that it's a necessary ingredient in this recipe. All right, now we're going to put down our mixer, lock it in place, go on low, because if you go on high, you're going to end up with powdered sugar all over. Mix it up, and it'll be kind of coarse and crumbly at first. Then we add in some water. So once it's mixed, I'll go on a medium speed, and I use between 1/4 and 1/3 of a cup of water, okay? So start out with about 2 tablespoons. This is all about consistency because you want it to be thin enough to dip, but not so thin that it just, you know, slides right off the cookie. Be careful at this point when you're adding extra water because it can go from perfect to too thin just like that. But if you do get it a little too thin, just add in a little bit more confectioner's sugar. All right, let's test the consistency of it with a little spoon. That looks actually pretty good. Now let me make sure we've got everything really well mixed. There are some chunks on the bottom, so I'm gonna scrape down the sides and just mix it another minute. But I think we have saved that powdered sugar coming out. So there's some powdered sugar on the very, very bottom here that we need to mix in. That might mean I need to adjust my mixer paddle a little bit, but we'll worry about that later. But yeah, that looks like a good consistency. So I don't think I'm gonna need to add any more water, but we will get in here with the scraper, scrape the sides down, and mix it for, another 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll find out whether or not the added powdered sugar makes it too thick, and we can go from there. So what I've used so far is about a quarter cup of cold water. That looks pretty good. All right. Now for dipping. What I like to do is get some sort of a container that's deep and has a knife, a big enough opening that you can easily stick the cookie in. This is just a blender cup. You can also use a pint glass, anything like that will work just fine. Now we're gonna pour the icing into the cup and get to dipping our biscotti. And now we will pour the icing in here. All right, first cookie. Now, you could set them up like this and just drizzle the tops. That would be perfectly fine. You could just dip them straight in like this. I'll just do one just like that. Dip them straight in just like that, and then let all the excess drip off. And then set it down like that to harden. That's perfectly fine. But what I like to do is just a little bit fancier, even though it doesn't take any longer. And I just tip this over a little bit and go in diagonal. So once I have it down here on the side, I lift it up. Now I've got a diagonal line where the biscotti cookie is unicened and icened. And I like that look. I think it looks classy and it looks kind of fancy. Again, let the excess drip off. And set it down. Now you can see on this one, there's gonna be some drippage. Don't worry about that, because when it hardens, you'll be able to lift it up and you'll just leave that behind. So don't worry about that, it's no big deal. There's gonna be drippage on this other one too, because ordinarily when we ice in cookies, we do it flat, which is another option, okay? That's another option you can do. You take some of the icing, take your biscotti cookie and spread it over the top. You can do the whole thing or just parts of it. Now I'm not being too particular here about how it looks, but you get the gist of that, okay? And then you just have the top done and you put them down. So there's tons of different ways that you can decorate these cookies. Now, I've already had some that I decorated when I tested the recipe, so let me grab them so I can show you how it hardens up. What I recommend doing is leaving them overnight on the counter. Room temperature is fine. And then the icing will harden. All right, so these two I was practicing with. I did just a top of this one and then I sprinkled some gold dust on it, but I wasn't really happy with the way that looked. And I thought this one looked good, but I messed up over here, but that's exactly, what I did right here. So when this hardens, it'll be the same thing and it'll look pretty good. Actually, I think this one's gonna look a little bit better. All right, put that right back in there. So now I can touch this, okay? It's hard. It's not gonna come off, so you can still, stack them and give them as gifts, all right? All right, now what's most important is the flavor, okay? This is usually served with a tea or coffee, so you dunk them in and they kind of soften a little bit. But because we added some butter, they're not super, super crunchy, but they're delicious. Oh my gosh. Oh wow. These are so good. You get the pumpkin flavor with that spice. Oh my gosh. Oh, those are good. They are so good. That's good too. So however you like them, dipped in chocolate, plain, or make my icing, you are gonna love these if you love pumpkin spice.